Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Clear Values podcast. Today, it is my pleasure to be speaking with William Cohan, who is the New York Times best-selling author of The Price of Silence, Money and Power, House of Cards, and The Last Tycoons, which won the 2007 FT Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year award. He is a founding partner of Puck, the digital media company known for its insider-focused newsletters and journalism on power corridors like Wall Street, Washington, Silicon Valley, and Hollywood. He has also written for the New York Times, the Financial Times, Bloomberg Businessweek, Fortune, The Atlantic, The Nation, and The Washington Post, amongst others. Today, we're talking about his book, Power Failure, The Rise and Fall of General Electric, which was called a tour de force by the Financial Times, monumental by The Economist, and earned accolades from several others. William, welcome to the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's nice to be here.
So you've really got a very interesting story and quite a storied career to boot. So what was it that led you on the path to writing a book about General Electric?
Well, I'll try to give you the shorter version. It's a long book, so there could be a long version too. But so I after I got my MBA from Columbia, I had been a journalist for a few years and went back and got my MBA and uh, got my first job out of there at GE Capital, uh, financing leveraged buyouts in New York. This was in the late 80s. I just thought it was so ironic that a guy who had been a journalist covering public schools in North Carolina uh, could, through the alchemy of the MBA program in the U.S., come out the other side and get hired to finance leveraged buyouts in the dawn of the leveraged buyout boom. Um, but anyway, I did that for a couple of years, worked for the chief credit officer at GE Capital for a year, and then moved on to Lazard and investment banking on Wall Street. But fast forward, my office mate when I was at GE Capital was a guy named John Flannery, who many years later became the CEO of GE. Uh, Incredibly, improbably. I mean, we all sort of suspected he was the kind of guy who could become the CEO. He stuck out his career at GE, and most of the rest of us just moved on after a period of time. So he succeeded Jeff Immelt as the CEO of GE, who had succeeded Jack Welch as the CEO of GE. So uh, John was remained a good friend of mine, and while he was his time as CEO, he was, which was unfortunately very short because of many of the reasons that I explain in the book. Uh, Kept calling me up in frustration with a lot of the things that he saw going on there, and that he had discovered in the wake of Jeff Immelt's time as CEO, and he sort of encouraged me to write a book about it. But of course, I told him I couldn't write a book about it because he was the CEO and he was a friend of mine. So I couldn't do that because obviously I would, you know, uh, it would be hard to be objective at that point. Uh, but unfortunately, as I said, then after about 15 months, he was forced to resign by the board, and then I thought, well, if John has been forced to resign, now there's a new CEO. The story has gotten even better. Now I can write a book about it. So that's what I did. It was quite a massive undertaking, considering the company was formed in 1892, and it was then, 2000, you know, 20, 21, 22. So it was a lot of history and vicissitudes to capture in the book, which I I tried to do.
Yeah, I think you did that very well. It's about 800 pages, which ranks it up there with
With
one of
notes and
yeah,
index, and so
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
not quite as tomey as you would think for 800 pages, but it's big and long and complicated.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I appreciate how it's written as well. It kind of reminds me of one of those Robert Caro books on
Mm.
Lyndon Johnson as well. In
Well,
its
that's quite a compliment.
its scope, its level of detail, but also its readability as well. It's 800 pages of very readable content, and that's the thing that I think makes the difference. And I think that's something that Caro's talked about as well in his work. You know, that history should be readable and engaging, not just down to the sterile facts, because a lot of times it is those details and those anecdotes that you pick up from interviews with people that really brings to life the stories and gives an encapsulation of the quote unquote facts that are being presented. So in terms of GE, then how just like you say, this company was founded in the 19th century, in the late 19th century. So very long history indeed, and the history that you cover is quite interesting because a lot of people assume that it was founded by Thomas Edison, and you realize, well, you basically point out that's not quite entirely true, and you go into some of the nuances and details of that. But at one time, it was absolutely huge, wasn't it? It was really, really massive, and I don't think people today, people who've grown up in certainly in the 2010s, for example, will really appreciate just how big GE was. So give us a flavor of just how big and how significant in terms of its influence GE was at its peak.
I mean, you could argue that GE. I mean, GE was a financial powerhouse. G Capital was probably the third largest financial institution in the world. It was obviously not a bank. It didn't take deposits, but it did everything else that banks do. So it was also a huge manufacturing company. It was also a technological innovator. I mean, it was probably, sort of the Google, Apple, Amazon, rolled up into one at one point under Jack Welch. The company's valuation and influence really exploded when he took over the company in the early 1980s. It had a market value of $12 billion. And towards the end of his tenure in the late 1990s, it had a market value of 650 billion, making it the most valuable company in the world at that point, and was generally viewed as the most respected and most influential company in the world. And It was also viewed as a hunting ground for CEO leadership. And so headhunters would routinely recruit future CEOs at other companies out of GE. So it was sort of one of these powerhouses. It was also a conglomerate, so that made it, it was like frankly, it was like a very massive, LBO firm that had owned companies in all sorts of different fields. Jack was basically a M&A master, constantly buying and selling and pruning and fixing the portfolio and moving in and out of businesses. He had a philosophy that if GE couldn't be number one or number two in the businesses that it chose to be in, that it should, get out of them or sell them or, move on. And so, uh, he made it very big in certain industries like, healthcare and power. And obviously, at one point, they owned NBC and then NBC Universal. So uh, it was a remarkable company, sort of a vestige of a time that obviously doesn't exist anymore. The whole conglomerate era, which was, very popular through a lot of the 20th century, has now been, discredited to a large extent, and companies are that were big are breaking themselves up into smaller parts all the time now. Obviously, GE did that under Larry Culp, which was John Flannery's idea. We just saw the other day that Kraft and Heinz, which was a Warren Buffett 3G construct, is now going to split itself up too. So, I mean, the conglomerate era is pretty much dead, although GE was by far the most successful conglomerate and most valuable and most widely respected. So they sort of were the exception that proved the rule. But in the end, Larry Culp decided to split it up, and a couple of the pieces, two or three of the pieces have done well, but they have not yet, and they might, but they have not yet recaptured the valuation that they once had under Jack Welch. And, people have argued that, well, he was sort of a master manipulator, and he, just charmed Wall Street and charmed investors and charmed the Wall Street analysts. But he also, put up the numbers and made GE extremely profitable and extremely important company. So, the idea of how did this company get to be so big and powerful and global? I think it was operating in like 150 of the 180 or so countries. And how did that once, very powerful and important company, sort of succumb to the need to break itself up and essentially dissolve.
Yeah, some massive talking points there for sure, and not least Jack Welch himself. So just to give us a flavour of Jack Welch's impact and his, I suppose, influence on the success of the company, then what was that? Where was GE when Jack Welch took over as CEO, and where did he leave it?
Well, it was always, pretty much from the start, it was always an important company because it was a technological leader. Because uh, basically the company's first business was creating the electric power grid in the late 19th century, and was sort of helped create the Gilded Age in the U.S. I mean, being able to provide lighting and electricity was obviously a massive innovation on the in the nature of the internet or artificial intelligence. Some of the things that we are wowed by today, but providing electricity from a grid, from a generation, and distributing it to people's homes and people's businesses, well, that was quite something, obviously. And it was backed uh, early on by J.P. Morgan, the man, and so that and other venture capitalists from Boston. So it was also a VC backed company, which again, we see parallels with AI today and the internet, 25 years ago. So it was just a very innovative company. It was a leading defense contractor for a long time, a leading nuclear power innovator, jet engines, including for fighter jets, but also obviously passenger jets. It made the engines on the jets that were involved with 9/11. So, it created the X-ray machine. I mean, so many different innovations, from jet engines and X-ray machines to, silly putty, which you don't even know what that is, but that was like a kid's toy when I was growing up. that just they discovered by accident and then marketed into like a toy bonanza. So, uh, and then as I mentioned before, I mean, this whole financial services juggernaut. So, but again, an important and powerful company, in the Dow Jones Industrial Average relatively early on, and for a long time until it came out. Uh, but as I said, when Jack took over, it was a 12 billion market cap company, market value company, which now doesn't sound so huge in the era of trillion-dollar companies. But he turned it into a company worth 650 billion, which again was the most valuable company in the world in the late 90s when he did that. And would it could it have been? I think under Jack, if he were immortal, which he was obviously not, I think it could have stayed on a similar trajectory that it was on. I think he understood the company and its various parts better than his successor Jeff Immelt did, and um, I think it could probably be as valuable or more valuable today than sort of. I think it would have probably been a trillion-dollar company, but who knows? I mean, a lot happened after Jack turned it over to Jeff Immelt. I mean, including and especially, he took over. Jeff Immelt took over as CEO. His first day in the office was September 10th, 2001, and his next day in the office was 9/11. So that'll change things, obviously, and did.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting you point out there quite rightly that GE was already a very, very important company before Jack Welch for the reasons stated. So how did Jack rise to the top of GE then? How did he succeed in climbing to the top of the ladder?
Well, I mean, in any big company, in any company, I mean, if you weren't the founder, of the company, how you maneuver your way through the political thicket of any corporate structure is a combination of many factors: luck, skill, uh, performance on a long-term basis, unbelievable political um, abilities. Jack had all of those things. He was a force of nature. I interviewed him many times for this book at the end of his life, and even then, he was a force of nature. When I was working there, obviously, I was aware of him, but had never met him. He was um, had a PhD in like nuclear engineering from the University of Illinois. Even though he grew up in eastern Massachusetts, and uh, went to the plastics division of GE when it was in its infancy, and his job was to essentially figure out how to market these plastic pellets that GE had discovered but didn't know what to do with. And Jack just was an incredible, brilliant sort of marketer and figured out that like for instance, the auto industry could replace all the steel in that you used to make cars with plastic or forms of plastic, and so he sold big bags of plastic pellets to the auto industry and transformed it essentially. That kind of innovation and success made him very, very powerful in the plastics division, which was based in Western Massachusetts. And basically, he didn't want to leave there uh, because he had his own little fiefdom up there, and like he had his own private jet and his. But eventually, if he wanted to be considered to be CEO of all of GE, he was told he needed to move down to Fairfield, Connecticut, which is where the headquarters was after moving from New York City. And he reluctantly did that and sort of played the game of competing against four or five other guys to become the successor, to become the CEO of GE. And he was, as I said, very outstanding political skills, and he impressed Reg Jones, who was from the UK and had moved to the US and over was very very different than Jack. But I think it was like a situation of opposites attracting, and Reg Jones realized that Jack was a bit of a disruptor, had a magnetic personality, and was sort of just what GE needed at the beginning of the 1980s. And he selected Jack, who was the youngest of the candidates, who was at that point head of GE Capital, head of plastics, head of small appliances, head of a bunch of things, uh, and selected him to be the CEO. And for the next 20 years, he reigned over the place.
Did he get away with much on his rise to the top in terms of you think about cancel culture now and you think about corporate life and
Mm,
everybody's extremely careful nowadays and of
mm.
course now we've all got smartphones and social media accounts but are there any things is there anything or are there things that strike you as being things that he got away with that nowadays if it had been caught on a smartphone and put on the internet that would have ended his career or at least his chances of ascending at GE?
The short answer is yes. Um, and I I detail a number of them in the book. Um, yeah, I would say he was sexist, piggish, uh, used his power to, uh, get what he wanted to. He had, numerous affairs. He made fun of people and their weight and their appearance. Yeah, so he probably would have been canceled in the smartphone era if he had been if that had been captured and distributed on social media. But none of that stuff existed then. I think in every book that I've written about that kind of behavior. And of course, that doesn't make any of it right. But it was, what happened back then, and there weren't smartphones, and for whatever reason, people were, uh, I mean, some of it became public, obviously, but it didn't seem to affect people's careers in the same way it did after, the Me Too movement. And I don't know whether we're sort of reverting a little bit back to that, unfortunately. Uh, um, as we have some revisionist history around Me Too, which I don't really understand, but it seems to be happening. But yeah, Jack got away with things that nowadays CEOs can't get away with.
Interesting. Yeah, it is funny how these things these kind of these values and the assessments of good and bad on the basis of certain behaviors can kind of oscillate from one side to the other because clearly Me Too was quite a big it was a watershed moment, but then some would argue that it went too far, and then so the pendulum swings one way, and then does it swing back another way? But irrespective of Me Too, it seems like the genie is out of the bottle in respect to what people will tolerate and what they won't tolerate, especially when you look at the workforce and the rising generation, the workforce, and what they will put up with and what they won't put up with. So that's one thing at least that has changed is people's perhaps people's tolerance. That's a sense that I get anecdotally is that people are probably less likely to tolerate certain abuses in their own careers if they're trying to progress in a corporate environment. They'd probably just sooner leave and go somewhere else now than they might have done in previous decades. That's my general sense anyway.
Yeah, we just saw the what CEO at Nestle who was having an affair with someone you know, obviously inside the organization. He, was fired and or resigned, whatever he did the other day. So, yeah, I think there's there's a new standard. I think at least in corporations where there's accountability. We don't really see that kind of accountability, say, in our federal government, which I don't really understand for the life of me. But some reason elected officials can claim immunity from some of this stuff.
Mm,
But maybe eventually the electorate will come around and see the error of their ways here. But yeah, in corporations, it does seem to still be uh, something that is frowned upon, and with good reason. And boards of directors seem to be taking action now in ways that they didn't, whatever it was, 40, 30, 35, 40 years ago,
mm,
or they didn't know about it, or didn't choose to investigate it, or it wasn't reported, or it was covered up and buried and swept under the rug. I mean, you could easily imagine boards of directors that back then who, were sort of in the pocket of the CEO anyway, saying, wow, this guy's doing a great job. He's has this indiscretion. Do we really want to fire the CEO who's doing a great job because of this indiscretion? Let's just sweep it under the rug. Well, you can't really do that anymore. So
mm.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Go back to Jack Welch then, William. When did you first meet with him, and why was he interested in speaking with you?
Um, it's always a good question why people are willing to speak to me. Not all of them are, obviously, but I would say most of them are. And uh, I think they figure. Well, I mean, I think Jack figured. By then I had had I hope a reputation as a serious investigative reporter and author of best-selling books. So you've got a company as big and as public as GE. It'd been basically a public company since 1892 or 1893, and you know, there was just unbelievable amount of information about the company. Although they did not let me into their archives. Larry Culp did not agree to let me do that, which fine, that's his decision. I couldn't care less. But there was plenty available and plenty of people. He must have figured plenty of people would talk to me, and I think he wanted to. He wasn't in the best of health then, and I think he thought this was going to be a chance to. Uh, answer my questions and say his piece about all sorts of topics and put it on the record. He never once, uh, you know, shied away from being on the record, which I really appreciated. I probably started, the book came out in November of 2022, so almost 3 years ago now, and our conversations probably began in probably during COVID in 2020, 2021. Uh, uh, he died in, well, I guess probably began in 1918. He died in March of 2020, right as COVID was beginning. I think our last interview was in the late summer of 2019, and the conversations began in probably early, the summer of 2018. Um, we both have. We had houses near each other in Nantucket, and we had many conversations in Nantucket. But I also interviewed him at his house in Palm Beach and his apartment in Manhattan. Uh, and I guess I said he was very generous with his time and his energy and his insights. Uh, and I think it made a huge difference. I know there have been other books out there critical of Jack, and did he ruin capitalism forever? I mean, I think that's completely ridiculous. Or uh, did he, you know, cheat? Abuse the accounting rules? I explored that with him in great depth and with others, and did he do what he was permitted to do? Yes. Did he, appear to cross the lines? You know, uh, I think there might have been some occasions where he did that, but I don't think he did anything uh, in a way that would misrepresent GE's financial picture. I think he understood what GE Capital was up to and the risks involved with financing it the way it did. Um, he would. He was very good at offsetting gains in sale of one division with losses that were accruing in another to sort of net it out to not affect profitability. Um, he was a smart guy and knew the rules. And I mean, Goldman Sachs does the same thing. Every the lines exist. And most companies will go right up against those lines. And especially in an era now where there doesn't seem to be any enforcement by any regulatory agency in Washington. The SEC seems to be toothless and doesn't seem to. I mean, when's the last time you heard about a SEC regulatory event against a company, unless it's a company that's in Trump's crosshairs for whatever reason. So, uh, I think uh, CEOs and their boards, if they know about what's going on, will really pretty much permit whatever it is that's quote unquote legal right up into the line and try not to cross it. So, I don't think Jack was any different in that regard.
Yeah, interesting. What sort of story do you think he was trying to tell, and particularly in relation to his legacy? Because he mentions in some quite colourful language the mistake that he feels he made in relation to his succession and the appointment of Jeff Immelt in particular.
Yeah, even before I could sit down for our first meeting at the Nantucket Golf Club, he was very clear. He wanted me to know that he had screwed up the succession process. Again, you're too young to remember this, but there was a very public three-way succession process that Jack fomented and encouraged and made sure that it was regularly in the pages of the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and the New York Times. Who was up, who was down, who was in the running, and why. And obviously, Jeff Immelt was one of the three. And Jack, in very colorful language, told me that he screwed up the selection of Jeff Immelt. And of course, my reaction to that was, Jack, that was like your most important job. You're supposedly the world's greatest CEO. How could you screw up the most important job that you had as CEO, which is choosing your successor? And that, of course, led to many conversations about how that happened and why. And I, write about that in the book. And um, I think that Jack as a human being too, and Jeff was a very every bit as good as a politician as Jack was, and which often happens in these succession situations. It's like who's the best politician? Who can suck up the best to the CEO? Who can wow the current CEO and sort of cast a spell, if you will? And I think Jeff did that, and Jack, as he told me, he made a crucial mistake, which we discussed in great detail, when he was being considered by Reg Jones to be the CEO. All of the other CEO candidates were brought to Fairfield, and sort of Reg Jones could look at them every day for 2 years while he was deciding which one to recommend to the board to be his successor. And Jack told me how much he hated that. He hated sort of being in the crosshairs every day and watching the other four candidates suck up to Reg Jones, and he'd have to suck up to Reg Jones, and it just went on day after day for 2 years, and he hated it, even though he won. And he decided, he said to himself, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to run the succession process that way. I'm going to keep, he thought he had a great innovation. He thought he had a great idea, which was keeping the three CEO candidates out in their business units. One was head of power, one was head of jet engines, Jeff Immelt was head of healthcare, and manufacturing, and he kept them out out in the field, out in the U.S., Cincinnati, Atlanta, upstate New York, and so Milwaukee, and then he decided he would also appoint a COO, a chief operating officer, for each of those businesses, because he decided that the two candidates that lost, who weren't selected, they would have to leave the company, which that's a pretty big drain of talent. But he decided that whoever lost had to leave the company, and therefore there'd be, with a COO, would just step into the role and become the CEO of those businesses, and so there'd be no loss of leadership as a result of his decision. And so what that essentially meant is that the three candidates would be out there in the hinterlands and not in Fairfield, and they would come in for quarterly meetings or for budget reports or whatever it was. And every time they came in to Fairfield, they would be in politicking overdrive, and would be sucking up mercilessly to Jack. And he didn't see them on a day-to-day basis, so he couldn't really see their flaws like Reg Jones could see his flaws or the others' flaws. So he missed what was going on. He missed that Jeff Immelt was just like the best politician of the three, or he was seduced by it, as he told me, and that's why he supported Jeff. And some other board members told him that was going to be a mistake, but he didn't listen. He wanted Jeff, and he got Jeff. And then when I talked to him, whatever it was, 18 years later, he couldn't wait to tell me how he had screwed up and made a big mistake. And uh, and I think it was pretty clear to the market by then too that GE under Jeff Immelt was not what it had been under Jack Welch.
Mm. Interesting, because it's quite a strong framing of the narrative for Jack Welch to say, "Well, my mistake is this. This is my part in it. My part in it is that I chose the wrong guy," and almost leave it there. But some people, I think you've already alluded to this, but some others have mentioned that actually Jack sowed the seeds for GE's decline before he left. To what extent do you think that's true, and to what extent do you think the blame lays at Jeff Immelt's door?
Well, obviously, uh, I did years of research and talked to hordes of people about this, and I think the no disrespect to David Gellis and his book about Jack. Ironically, he has a new book about to come out about the CEO of Patagonia, who I much admire, who's sort of like the anti-Jack. His view, without talking to Jack, and was that Jack did sow the seeds of not only the destruction of GE, but the destruction of, whatever, was good about American capitalism, by, having this relentless focus on, shareholder value and, uh, you know, uh, stock price and quarterly earnings. I just don't believe that. So, and I don't think the people who actually worked with Jack and worked for Jack believe that. And so, Jack of course, he made mistakes. He was not infallible, but he took a company that was worth 12 billion when he took over and turned it into a company worth 650 billion. That's pretty impressive. You know, uh, you know, it's sort of I don't know if it's quite Elon Musk like, but it's for the time it was a very impressive accomplishment, and shareholders loved him, and Wall Street analysts who probably didn't understand the company, certainly didn't understand the financial services side of the company, loved him. Employees, by and large, loved him. Not all of them, because he fired lots of them. But the people who were around him found him to be engaging, driven, smart, open-minded, would listen, but made decisive decisions, and often they were the right ones. And I think Jeff Immelt had a very different approach, more imperial, more top-down, and as one former GE executive told me, you know, basically summarizing, when Jack had the big decisions to make, he generally made the right ones. When Jeff Immelt had big decisions to make, he generally made the wrong ones. And so I think, uh, you know, I, as I said, I personally think that if somehow Jack were, quasi immortal and could have stayed on, I don't think, I don't think the fate that GE ended up suffering would have come about. For starters, I don't think he ever would have agreed to split the company up. Um, Obviously, Jeff Immelt didn't do that either, but by the time John Flannery took over, it was clear that something had to happen. And, he's the one that wrote the white paper, Project Eisenhower, to split the company up. And then, 15 months later, he was gone. And Larry Culp, who engineered the coup after John brought him onto the board from Danaher, uh, uh, implemented John's strategy of splitting the company up, which I don't think Jack ever would have done.
Did because Jack was so well known for making his numbers and for the company making
and,
its numbers.
and was very well respected by Wall Street, understood the company. Um, Jeff Immelt was more of a sort of a marketing guy. He had some very big ideas that he would try to implement.
Hmm.
Jack was much more of a sort of a nuts and bolts, bottom line financial performance guy, and who also was an engineer, so understood the inner workings of manufacturing, but he also understood, how GE Capital worked. He was basically the one that recognized it as a potential huge moneymaker for GE and could be much bigger than it could scale. And
Mhm.
as he said to me, it's much easier making money from money than it is to making money from building a jet engine. So I think he understood the risks of borrowing short and lending long, which I don't think Jeff Immelt understood those risks as well, which is why when the financial crisis came along, he like completely panicked and took a lot of steps that I don't think Jack ever would have done. I don't think Jack ever would have let GE Capital get to be in a position of being risky and being potentially floundering and potentially going bankrupt as it did, as it almost did in 2008. I don't think Jack in the, between 2001 and 2008 would have allowed that. He would have recognized that they were the risks of borrowing in the commercial paper market and borrowing short and lending long, and would have done something to shore that up, which, Goldman Sachs understood that too and lengthened out their financing. Yes, it cost them more to do it, but it also uh, reduced dramatically the risks that they faced in 2008 when all of their competitors who were borrowing in the short-term market faced serious problems. So, I mean, again, it's all speculation. I don't know. I mean, obviously, Jack left in 2001 and Jeff took over and did what he did in 2008, which I think led to, you know, obviously led to selling GE Capital in pieces in 2015, and then led to uh, Jeff Immelt not making his numbers in 2017, and the board saying that's enough.
Okay, that's interesting. So just balancing out Jack's approach then, making the numbers in the short term and hitting them time and time again, understand the company really well as he did. How did he balance that with a long-term approach to business sustainability then?
Well, he married an ability to meet, quarterly numbers. I mean, he was basically an expert at telling the market what. I mean, this doesn't really happen anymore, but he was very, very good about telling the market what GE's profits were going to be on a earnings per share basis, and was very, very good through I think clever approaches. Some people think it was manipulation and accounting shenanigans, but I think it was just doing. He had a lot of levers he could pull, and he pulled them because he could sell an asset that GE Capital owned very quickly and generate a profit. And he could marry that off, if one of the manufacturing businesses wasn't doing so well, he could create a profit to offset that loss so that he could make the earnings numbers that he told the street he would make. But he married that ability with this overarching long-term strategy of being number one or number two in the businesses that GE chose to be in, and if they weren't going to be number one or two, they got rid of them, and that led to the sale of the major appliances division and the small electrics division and all sorts of things that GE used to be in that Jack essentially got out of.
Hmm. Besides the hiring of Jeff Immelt then, with the benefit of hindsight, is there any other advice that Jack might have followed to prevent GE's decline?
Well, I think again, this is you know it's hard to know exactly, but as sort of I mean, G Capital was created in the 1930s to allow people to buy GE's products by borrowing money from GE. So if you wanted to buy a GE washing machine, you could borrow money from GE Credit, as it was called then, to buy the washing machine. That was a relatively small business. So they were lending to their own customers who wanted to buy their products, like Ford does when it lends money to people who want to buy their cars. But Jack realized this could be a much bigger business, and so like when I came along in 1987, he had started this, and G Capital had like 20 different business lines, one of which was financing leverage buyouts. Well, obviously that's a very different. I mean, and they could, because basically he decided he could arbitrage GE's AAA credit rating. He could borrow so cheaply, so he borrowed cheaply and then lend the money out at a huge spread, and it was just total profit. I mean, at one point, G Capital was providing like 40 to 50% of G's profits. So I think Jack really understood that business, and he also had Gary Wendt, who really understood that business. And so I don't think that the mistakes that Jeff Immelt made, in the years leading up to the 2008 financial crisis, Jack would have made with regard to GE Capital. And therefore, I don't think GE Capital would have needed a bailout, would have become, might have become a SIFI, but I don't think Jack Welch ever would have made the decision, as Jeff Immelt did in 2015, to sell GE Capital. You look in the years since the 2008 financial crisis, what business has just like exploded in terms of profitability? Well, one of them is financial services. If you look at JP Morgan Chase now, which was a kind of more of a pipsqueak back in 2008, and sort of compared to where it is now. Obviously, it was one of the banks that was chosen to rescue Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual and other things. But nowadays, it makes 50 plus billion of net income a year. I mean, I think Jack Welch and financial services is basically an oligopoly. I think Jack Welch would have wanted GE Capital to be part of that, and would have figured out a way to have it be strong through that period, and it would still be viable today. And now it of course doesn't exist, and that's the third largest financial services business in the world that doesn't exist anymore. And because Jeff Immelt decided he wanted to sell it off in pieces and get rid of it, and then he kept promising this $2 a share thing, and then when he didn't have GE Capital's profits anymore to get to $2 a share, he missed by a whopping a margin, and the board and the street said, that's enough of you, Jeff Immelt. So I don't think Jack Welch would have. Yeah, I could be totally wrong, obviously. I mean, this is all speculation, but I think that he understood that business. He lit the fire under that business. He expanded that business. He made it, the most profitable part of GE. I think he would have done everything he could to preserve that, which probably would have meant doing less financing. I mean, all it would have taken, frankly, is lengthening out the tenor of the way they finance themselves, instead of continuing to finance themselves in the short-term commercial paper market, 90 days. He would have, I think, figured out ways to lengthen that out through issuing bonds or long-term debt or borrowing money from banks. So,
Yeah.
what killed G Capital was, I think, Jeff Immelt failing to understand that borrowing short and lending long is a recipe for disaster.
Hmm. Interesting. So in terms of Jack's legacy, then he's often been dubbed the manager of the century. Do you think that's a worthy moniker for him, or is the myth greater than the man?
Took a company that was worth 12 billion and made it the most valuable company in the world. Uh, he created, his coaching tree. The people who worked at GE were highly sought after to be managers of other companies and CEOs of other companies. The people who worked for him, by and large, loved him. You could see that at his funeral in St. Patrick's Cathedral, where I was in March of 2020, and who his pallbearers were, who got up and spoke about him. Uh, he wasn't perfect, obviously. He was human. We talked about his flaws, and that certainly would have been an Achilles heel nowadays. But he created CNBC and MSNBC, and uh, you know, reacquired NBC for GE and created GE Capital Juggernaut, and uh, you know, so yeah, I think he's definitely worthy of the accolades he got. And I'm not a buyer of this revisionist history about his tenure that was popular a few years ago.
Interesting. So what would you say, given the success that Jack had and his legacy, and it's quite a list of successes that you mentioned there, as well as the ways that people saw him, what would you say the key takeaways are from Jack Welch that other business leaders, existing and aspiring, can learn from?
Well, it's each situation, each company is sui generis, and it's but I think there are some basic you have to be a successful CEO. Uh, Number one, you have to be gregarious, garrulous, open-minded, and be willing to listen to uh, uh, ideas that you don't necessarily agree with, and being willing to be sufficiently open-minded that you can have your mind changed by a cogent argument or financial analysis or whatever it is, so that you can turn on a dime if you have to, even though you may not agree with that idea. That is you have to have an open door and let people come in and express themselves, and not penalize themselves, not penalize them for ideas that you don't agree with. That kind of openness seems to be in short supply today, at least in Washington, which is really quite detrimental. But so that's number one, and number two, you have to really understand, your balance sheet, your income statement. You cannot put your company in a risk of too much leverage, over leveraging, being too aggressive. Jack was plenty aggressive, but he did it in the context of a AAA credit rating. So that gave you a lot of flexibility. And, you know, you've got to be careful to be disciplined in M&A and not overpaying. And I think Jack proved himself to be a very good buyer and seller of companies. He created a tremendous portfolio. Not everybody's good at that. And, Lord knows investment bankers will encourage you to buy and sell. They don't care whether the company does well or not. I mean, of course, they'll say they do, but I mean, what they care about is the deal. And then the most important job, of course, is finding the right successor, and that's the one that Jack failed at, and by his own admission, and objectively speaking, it's absolutely true. But you know. So he did a lot of things right. He failed at the one thing that was his most important job.
Yeah, it sounds like a real shame when you put it like that, where he did so much right and he took this company from fairly, I wouldn't say entirely humble beginnings because it had already got quite a strong foothold and it had some very, very powerful positioning and assets. But the success that he did achieve is probably comparable to some of the household names that we now know. And if you looked at, I suppose, the figures that you've cited, if we looked at them in today's money, they would be much higher than they are in in the money of the time. So there's also that to bear in mind. So very interesting in terms of what you're saying about open-mindedness as well, and openness to different ideas, because we're such a company as big as GE and the number of people working there in the different business units. I suppose it's imperative to have all hands on deck and all eyes and ears open and all minds and perspectives working to get the best outcomes. If you don't have that level of openness, I can't imagine how anybody could be a successful CEO of an operation like that, or as it was, should we say. So that's Jack Welch and GE, William. Thank you so much for going through that. What are you working on now?
Uh, my new book, which is called Money to Burn, is about Leon Black and Apollo, the founding of Apollo Global Management, which is a very big alternative asset management company that grew out of the ashes of Drexel Burnham in 1990. So uh, it's only 35 years old, so I don't have to grapple. I didn't have to grapple with 100 plus years of history, but it's a very interesting story about the growth of private equity, private credit, and the way Wall Street is being transformed largely by firms like Apollo. So that book took me a couple of years to do, but it's a 2026 publication. Uh, I don't understand really why it takes so long for books to be published, but you've got about 1,000 of them there on your shelf. So,
Yeah.
behind you, I don't understand why it takes so long, but it does. So you just, what can you do?
Yeah, yeah, that sounds fascinating. It sounds like a really interesting new project there, William, and we'll certainly look forward to that one.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.